I always thought that extraordinary moments arrived with fanfare. A dramatic announcement, a sudden crash, something undeniable. But the truth is, they often slip in quietly, disguised as ordinary Tuesday evenings, when you're doing nothing more remarkable than watching the shadows stretch across your living room floor. My name is Margaret. I'm 51 years old, and I've been living in this same two-story house on Maple Drive for nearly 23 years. It's the kind of street where everyone knows which car belongs to whom, where the smell of someone's barbecue drifts through your open windows on summer nights, and where you can pretend you have complete privacy, even though your lives are quietly intertwined. Before I tell you what happened that evening, I want to ask you something. Where are you right now as you listen to this? What city, what room? I find comfort in imagining all of us scattered across different places, yet somehow connected through this moment, this story. It makes the world feel smaller, warmer, more intimate. David moved into the brick house at the end of the block about 5 years ago. He's probably in his late 40s, though he carries himself with a kind of gentle deliberateness that makes age feel irrelevant. He's the type of neighbor who always remembers to bring your trash bins back from the curb, who offers to shovel your walkway when the snow gets heavy, who waves from his car window even when he's running late. That particular evening started like countless others before it. My son had texted to say he was staying at a friend's place for dinner, and the house felt almost too quiet. The way spaces do when you're suddenly aware of every small sound. The ticking of the kitchen clock, the settling of old wood beams, the distant hum of traffic from the highway 2 miles away. I was curled up on the window seat with a paperback novel I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks, a mug of chamomile tea cooling on the side table. The late afternoon sun was doing that magical thing it does in autumn, turning everything golden and soft, painting the maple trees outside with light that looked almost liquid. Through the window, I noticed David walking down the sidewalk. He wasn't in his usual hurry to get somewhere. Instead, he seemed to be taking his time, pausing occasionally to look at the houses, the trees, the sky, as if he were seeing the neighborhood for the first time or trying to memorize it. Normally, he would spot me in the window, offer that characteristic half-wave, half-salute of his, and continue on his way. But this time, something shifted. He stopped completely at the edge of my front yard. I watched him stand there for what felt like a full minute, his hands pushed deep into his jacket pockets, his gaze fixed on my front door. Then, as if he'd made some internal decision, he turned and walked up my driveway. I set down my book and met him at the door, opening it before he had a chance to knock. "Margaret," he said. And there was something different in his voice. A weight. "A purpose." "David," I replied, genuinely surprised. "Taking the scenic route today?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Something like that. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Just me and a book that's been boring me for chapters," I said lightly. "Would you like to come in? I just made tea." He hesitated, and in that hesitation I felt the presence of something unspoken hovering between us like humidity before a storm. "Actually," he said slowly, "would you mind if we sat outside? The evening's too nice to waste." I grabbed a cardigan from the coat hook and followed him onto the front porch. We settled into the 2 wicker chairs I'd bought at a yard sale years ago, their cushions faded but still comfortable. For a while, neither of us spoke. The neighborhood provided its own soundtrack. Children's laughter from 3 houses down, the rhythmic thwack of a basketball against pavement, a dog barking in staccato bursts at some invisible intruder. "Margaret," he finally began, then stopped. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together as if holding something fragile. "Can I tell you something honest? Something I've been carrying around for longer than I probably should have?" My heart did something strange in my chest. Not quite a skip. More like a sudden awareness of its presence. "Of course you can," I said, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I felt exposed in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not uncomfortable exactly, but seen. "I didn't just happen to walk by tonight," he admitted. "I've walked by here 7 times this week trying to work up the courage to stop. Trying to figure out how to say what I need to say without making everything awkward or ruining the easy friendship we have." I found myself holding my breath. "The truth is," he continued, his words coming faster now, as if speed might make them easier, "I think about you more than a neighbor probably should. I notice things like the way you hum while you're gardening, how you always check your mailbox twice as if hoping for something better the second time, the fact that you take your coffee outside every Saturday morning, rain or shine. And somewhere along the way, those small observations turned into something bigger, into admiration, into feelings I haven't felt in a very long time. The world seemed to pause. Even the children's laughter faded into the background, leaving only the sound of my own heartbeat loud in my ears. I looked down at my hands, noticed they were trembling slightly, and clasped them together in my lap. David, I started, then stopped, because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Here was this kind, steady man who had just laid his heart at my feet, and I was completely unprepared for the weight of it. Not because I didn't feel anything. Quite the opposite. I'd noticed him too, in ways I'd convinced myself were meaningless. The warmth in his smile. The care he took with small things. The way he always seemed genuinely interested when we had those brief conversations about weather or neighborhood news. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly, perhaps reading the confusion on my face. "I'm not expecting you to reciprocate or even respond right now. I just couldn't keep it to myself anymore. It felt dishonest, walking past your house every day, pretending I only saw you as a neighbor when that stopped being true months ago." The honesty in his voice was almost painful in its purity. This wasn't a rehearsed speech or a calculated move. This was simply a man being brave enough to tell the truth, consequences be damned. "You haven't caught me completely by surprise," I heard myself say and watched his eyes widen slightly. "I've noticed you too. The way you time your evening walks to coincide with when I'm usually outside. How you always find a reason to stop and talk. The kindness you show, not just to me, but to everyone on this street." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "But I need you to understand something. I've spent the last several years being a mother first, a neighbor second, and myself. Somewhere much further down the list. I don't even know who that self is anymore. And the idea of someone seeing me, really seeing me, as something more than just the woman who lives in the blue house with the unruly rose bushes, that's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure." He nodded, not rushing to fill the silence, giving my words the space to settle. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now," he said gently. "I'm not even asking for a decision. I just wanted you to know. To understand that you're not invisible, Margaret. Not to me." Something inside my chest loosened at those words. How long had it been since someone had made me feel seen? Since someone had looked past the roles I played and noticed the person underneath? We sat there as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. And we talked, really talked, in a way we never had before. He told me about his divorce 3 years earlier, not dwelling on the pain but acknowledging it honestly. About the loneliness of eating dinner alone every night, of having entire weekends stretch out with no one to share them with. I told him about the emptiness that had crept into my life after my son started spending more time with his own friends, building his own life. About feeling like I'd poured so much of myself into being a parent that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. "Do you know what I miss most?" I found myself saying. "Being surprised. Everything in my life has become so predictable. I know exactly how every day will unfold before it even begins. And I'm grateful for stability, I truly am. But sometimes I wonder if I've confused stability with stagnation." "I think about that too," David said. "About whether playing it safe is the same as being alive, or if it's just another form of sleepwalking." The streetlights flickered on as we talked, their orange glow creating pools of light along the empty sidewalk. The temperature dropped enough that I pulled my cardigan tighter, but neither of us moved to go inside. "What happens now?" I finally asked, the question hanging in the cooling air. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Whatever you're comfortable with," he said. "We can pretend this conversation never happened if that's what you need. We can go back to being cordial neighbors, or..." He paused, meeting my eyes again. "We can see what might grow if we're both willing to tend it carefully." I felt myself smile. The first genuine smile I'd felt in longer than I could remember. "I think," I said slowly, "I'd like to see what might grow." But slowly. Very slowly. With patience and honesty and clear boundaries. The relief that washed over his face was beautiful to see. "Slowly works for me," he said. "Slowly is good. It means we pay attention. It means we don't skip steps or rush past the important parts." We stayed on that porch until the stars began appearing, until the neighborhood grew quiet except for the occasional car passing by. And when he finally stood to leave, there was an understanding between us that hadn't existed before. An acknowledgement that something had fundamentally shifted, even if we couldn't yet name what it would become. "Thank you for listening," he said from the bottom of the porch steps, "and thank you for your honesty." "Thank you for being brave enough to speak first," I replied. I watched him walk back down the driveway and disappear into the evening shadows, and I stood there long after he was gone, one hand pressed against my chest where something had come alive again, something I thought had gone dormant for good. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the conversation, examining it from different angles, testing it for cracks or red flags and finding none. Just simple, honest vulnerability from a man who had taken a risk because staying silent had become more uncomfortable than speaking up. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind that makes everything soft and muted. I moved through my usual routine, shower, coffee, checking emails, but everything felt different. As if someone had adjusted the saturation on a photograph, making the colors richer, the contrasts sharper. I was watering the rose bushes when I heard his front door open across the way. I looked up instinctively, and there he was, pausing on his porch as if he too was testing the waters of this new reality we'd created. Our eyes met across the distance. He lifted one hand in greeting, a question implicit in the gesture. I smiled and waved back, and even from that distance I could see his shoulders relax. 2 days later, I found a note tucked under my welcome mat. Written in neat, careful handwriting, it said simply, "There's a new coffee shop on Cedar Street that's supposed to have excellent scones. Would you like to try it with me? Saturday morning if you're free. No pressure, no expectations. Just coffee and conversation. David." I held that note for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision it represented. This was a threshold. Cross it, and there was no pretending we were just neighbors anymore. Stay where I was, and I'd be choosing safety over possibility. I chose possibility. Saturday morning found us at a small table by the window of the copper kettle, steam rising from our cups, a plate of blueberry scones between us. And we talked the way people talk when they're genuinely interested in knowing each other, not the superficial chatter of acquaintances, but the deeper exchanges that reveal character and history and dreams. He told me about growing up on a farm in Iowa, about leaving for college and never quite finding his way back. I told him about my brief career in teaching before motherhood, about the children's book I'd started writing 5 years ago and never finished. "Why didn't you finish it?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I had to think about that. I think I convinced myself it wasn't important. That it was selfish to spend time on something just for me when there were so many other demands on my time. "That's not selfish," he said firmly. "That's called having a life beyond your obligations." The scones were excellent. The coffee was strong and rich. But what I remember most about that morning was the feeling of being with someone who actually listened when I spoke, who asked follow-up questions, who seemed genuinely invested in understanding who I was beyond the surface details. As weeks turned into months, David and I created our own rhythm. Sunday morning walks became a tradition. We'd meet at the corner of Maple and Oak, fall into step beside each other, and talk about everything and nothing as we circled the neighborhood. Sometimes we'd stop at the park and sit on a bench, watching dogs chase frisbees and children conquer playground equipment. He fixed the loose railing on my back deck one Saturday afternoon, refusing payment but accepting the offer of homemade lemonade and sandwiches. I helped him organize his garage, which had devolved into chaos after his move years earlier, and discovered he was a meticulous labeler once given the proper supplies. We established rules without calling them that. We didn't rush into physical intimacy. We respected each other's need for space and separate lives. We communicated openly about feelings and expectations. And we protected what we were building by not broadcasting it to the entire neighborhood, not out of shame, but out of a shared understanding that some things are more precious when held gently, privately, until they're strong enough to withstand external scrutiny. One evening in November, as an early snow began to fall, David showed up at my door with a box. "What's this?" I asked, letting him in and brushing snowflakes from his shoulders. "Open it," he said, a hint of nervous excitement in his voice. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind with thick cream-colored pages and a ribbon bookmark. On the first page, in his careful handwriting, He'd written, "For the stories that are waiting to be told." I looked up at him, my throat tight with emotion. "You mentioned that children's book you never finished," he said. "I've been thinking about it, about how many things we leave undone because we convince ourselves they don't matter. But they do matter, Margaret. Your creativity matters. Your dreams matter." I set the journal down carefully and did something I'd been carefully avoiding for months. I stepped forward and hugged him properly, letting myself lean into his steady presence. He wrapped his arms around me without hesitation, and for a long moment, we just stood there in my entryway while snow fell silently outside. "Thank you," I whispered against his shoulder. "Not just for the journal, for seeing me, for reminding me that I'm allowed to want things for myself." "Always," he murmured back. That winter, I started writing again. Not the children's book, that story no longer felt relevant, but something new. Short pieces about observation and connection, about the small moments that make up a life, about learning to be open to surprise in middle age. David became my first reader, offering thoughtful feedback without ever trying to control my creative vision. And I became his sounding board for a project of his own, learning to play the guitar he'd bought 15 years earlier and never touched. We were both, in our own ways, giving ourselves permission to begin again. One evening in late winter, as we sat in my living room with the fireplace crackling and our respective projects spread out around us, David looked up from his guitar and said, "You know what's strange?" "What?" I spent so many years thinking my life had already happened, that the good parts were behind me, and all that was left was maintenance mode until retirement, and then whatever comes after. But this, us, the walks, the conversations, you working on your writing, me finally learning this instrument, this feels more alive than anything I've experienced in decades. I set down my pen and looked at him. This man who had walked up my driveway one autumn evening and been brave enough to tell the truth. "I know exactly what you mean," I said. I'd forgotten that life doesn't have to be divided into before and after, that there can be multiple befores, multiple beginnings. He smiled that warm, genuine smile I'd come to treasure. "To multiple beginnings, then," he said, holding up his water glass in a mock toast. "To multiple beginnings," I echoed, touching my own glass to his. As I sit here now, looking back on that first evening when David stopped at my door, I'm struck by how close I came to not answering, to pretending I wasn't home, to choosing the safety of solitude over the risk of connection. I think about all the people who might be listening to this story, and I wonder how many of you are standing at your own thresholds, uncertain whether to open the door to something new. How many of you have convinced yourselves that certain chapters of your life are closed, that certain possibilities are no longer available, that safety and comfort are worthy substitutes for growth and joy? I'm here to tell you that it's never too late. That surprise and wonder and the courage to begin again don't have expiration dates. That sometimes the most extraordinary moments arrive disguised as ordinary evenings when someone looks at you and really sees you. David and I didn't rush into anything dramatic. We didn't upend our lives or make grand romantic gestures. We simply chose, again and again, day after day, to be honest with each other and with ourselves. To move slowly and deliberately. To build something sturdy rather than something flashy. And in doing so, we both rediscovered parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. My son eventually noticed the change in me, the lightness in my step, the way I hummed while cooking again. "You seem happy, Mom," he said one day, and it wasn't a question but an observation tinged with relief, as if he'd been worried about me without knowing how to express it. "I am happy," I told him. "I'm remembering how to be happy." David's sister visited from out of state and pulled me aside at a neighborhood barbecue. "I don't know what you've done to my brother," she said, "but he's more like himself than he's been in years. Thank you for that. But here's what I want you to understand. David didn't make me happy. He didn't fix me or complete me or fill some void. What he did was mirror back to me the possibility of my own aliveness. He reminded me that I was allowed to want things, to pursue interests, to take up space in my own life rather than existing solely in service to everyone else's needs, and I'd like to think I did something similar for him." It's spring now as I record this. The rose bushes I'd neglected for years are blooming with an enthusiasm that feels almost defiant. The journal David gave me is half filled with stories and observations. His guitar playing has progressed from painful to almost pleasant. We still take our Sunday morning walks. We still sit on my porch on warm evenings, talking about books and current events and childhood memories. We still move at our own pace, honoring the boundaries we established and the respect we have for each other's independence. But there's also a deepening, a richness that comes from truly knowing another person, from seeing them at their worst and choosing to stay, from celebrating their successes without envy, from offering comfort during difficult moments without trying to fix everything. Last week, David asked me to look at houses with him. Not to move in together, he clarified quickly. I'm just ready for something smaller, something that needs less maintenance. And I'd value your opinion. We spent an afternoon driving around to open houses, imagining lives in different rooms, commenting on kitchen layouts and bathroom fixtures. And it struck me how comfortable we'd become with each other, how natural it felt to plan for futures that might intertwine without losing our individual shapes. What do you think? He asked as we stood in the backyard of a modest bungalow 3 streets over from where we both currently live. Too small? I said carefully, it depends on what you're planning to fill it with. He turned to look at me, understanding my deeper question. I'm planning to fill it with possibility, he said, with music and books and Sunday dinners, with quiet mornings and long conversations, with a life that has room for someone else. Should that someone want to be part of it? My heart, that organ I'd thought had settled into a predictable rhythm, did something unexpected again. I think that sounds lovely, I said. To everyone listening, I don't know where you are in your own story. Maybe you're young and think you have infinite time to figure everything out. Maybe you're my age and convinced your best chapters are behind you. Maybe you're older still and wondering if anything can surprise you anymore. But here's what I learned from one ordinary Tuesday evening that turned extraordinary. Courage looks different than we imagine. It's not always about grand gestures or dramatic changes. Sometimes it's just about being honest, about walking up to someone's door and telling the truth, about being willing to be seen. Growth doesn't stop at any particular age. We don't reach some arbitrary number and suddenly lose the capacity for new beginnings, for learning, for change. As long as we're breathing, we're capable of evolution. Connection requires vulnerability. We have to be willing to risk rejection, to feel foolish, to admit we don't have all the answers. But the alternative, staying safe and separate and slowly fossilizing in our comfortable routines, is far more dangerous to the soul. And finally, pay attention to the ordinary moments. Because that's where the extraordinary is hiding. In evening walks and front porch conversations. In shared cups of coffee and collaborative projects. In the simple act of noticing what another person notices. David didn't rescue me from anything. He simply reminded me that I was worth rescuing myself, that my desires mattered. That wanting more from life wasn't selfish or unrealistic. It was human, and I'd like to think I did something similar for him. We saved each other by refusing to let each other stay small and safe and sleeping. As I close this story, the evening sun is once again painting my living room in golden light. I can see David through his window across the street practicing guitar. In a few minutes, I'll walk over there and we'll decide what to make for dinner. Maybe we'll cook together in his kitchen, or maybe we'll order takeout and eat it on my porch. The details don't matter as much as the companionship does. My son is coming to visit next weekend, and he's bringing someone he wants me to meet. I think I'm ready for you to meet her, Mom, he said on the phone, and I heard both excitement and nervousness in his voice. I'd love to meet her, I told him, and I meant it. Life continues to unfold in ways I couldn't have predicted that evening when David walked up my driveway. Not dramatically, not with fireworks and orchestral swells, but with steady, accumulating joy. With purpose rediscovered. With the daily practice of choosing presence over autopilot. I still don't know where this story ultimately leads. David and I haven't made promises about forever, haven't tried to script what comes next. We're content to let it unfold naturally, to respond to what each day brings, rather than forcing it into predetermined shapes. But I do know this. I'm no longer sleepwalking through my own life. I'm awake, aware, and actively participating in my own existence. I'm writing again. I'm laughing again. I'm allowing myself to hope again. And if an ordinary Tuesday evening could deliver that kind of transformation, imagine what's possible in all the ordinary days still ahead. So to anyone listening who's wondering if it's too late, if the window has closed, if the opportunity has passed, it hasn't. As long as you're still here, still breathing, still capable of opening your front door, there's potential for new chapters to begin. All you have to do is be brave enough to answer when possibility comes knocking. My name is Margaret. I'm 51 years old, and I'm just beginning to understand what it means to be fully alive. Thank you for listening to my story. May it encourage you to write your own.